All right. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see everybody. And being on mute doesn't mean we don't want to hear everyone's voice. But appreciate everybody coming tonight. I want to encourage everyone because it's a big group, thank God. It might be easier if you put your screen on speaker so you see the individuals that are speaking as opposed to Hollywood squares. And I want to, again, thank everyone for joining this evening. I first want to give a little bit of a shout out to Simeon Wahlberg, who really kind of planted an idea in my head. I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we brought Sarah Boxer, Greg Waldstreicher, and Jake Sherman together for one night only in Stamford, Connecticut? So Simeon, thanks a lot for the inspiration always and your wisdom and leadership. I want to acknowledge Toby Schaefer, our current president. Thanks for your leadership. Hashem should continue to bless you in all you do. And this is also a bit of a nachas night too. So it's wonderful to have Sarah's fans here, her family, and Greg's fans and Jake's fans. So let's give a big round of applause. I mean, come on. It's wonderful to have them here. Tonight is also being recorded. It will be live streamed on CNN and Fox tomorrow, and maybe on Punchbowl. We'll see what happens if it gets that far. But I also want to really acknowledge tonight's also really about thinking about what our roots are and how our roots shape who we are. I mean, each one of our illustrious panelists tonight, and we'll have a little more of a formal intro, are products of Stamford, Bicultural Hebrew Academy, and Congregation of Good at Shalom. And we as a community really only exist through the connection, midor lador, from one generation to the next. And it's really wonderful to have you back, sharing a little about your experiences and also many different things on our mind. We called tonight from Stamford to Washington and really appreciate your time. I want to introduce our moderator for this evening. He needs little introduction, but his name is Greg Waldstreicher, a Stamford native who attended Sarah Walker Nursery School, Bicultural, the Ramaz Upper School, and the University of Maryland. Greg and his wife, Rachel Vidalis, relocated to Stamford in 2017, and they have 3 boys, Jackson, Lincoln, and Warren. Greg currently serves on the United Jewish Federation Board, and the family continues to be active in the JCC and Congregation of Good Shalom communities. I have to say, Greg, I miss our coffees together when you were a student at Ramaz. You're very inquisitive, a kind man, an entrepreneur, and it's really wonderful to have you back in Stamford. And as Sarah and Jake, before I turn it over to Greg, you guys all are mensch and menschette, and Hashem should bless you in all that you do. We're proud of you in Stamford. We wish your parents and grandparents who are here much nachas, your siblings, I mean, they're all around, and thank you so much for your time. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Greg, who will introduce everybody and give us a framework for the evening. Thank you, Greg.
Excellent. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm a little uncomfortable considering I haven't been around this many people in over a year. And this is the first time I'm actually wearing a button-down shirt, so much so that Jackson said to me, Daddy, what are you wearing? He's used to seeing me in hoodies these days. So with that being said, I know everybody's laughing. I just can't hear you because everybody's muted, of course. So with that being said, just wanted to give a little rundown for tonight. We're going to be spending about an hour together. And we're going to be, first I'll introduce Jake and Sarah, and then we'll go into some Q&A based off of some current events. Also, there's a chat room here. If anybody can, or if you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit those questions directly to me in the chat room, and I'll intertwine those questions into the conversation. So with that being said, let me introduce Sarah and Jake. Thankfully, they were both nice to me when we all went to Bicultural. They were about 4 or 5 years older, so they didn't pick on me too much. Otherwise, tonight would be a little bit different. So Sarah is a senior producer at CNN, where she covers politics and breaking news based out of their New York bureau. In 2020, she was in the field covering the presidential election, coronavirus pandemic, and civil unrest across the country. After graduating from Cornell, she also worked for CBS and NBC, written for The Atlantic and National Journal, and worked closely with journalists like Katie Couric, John Dickerson, Aaron Burnett, and Erica Hill. Jake Sherman, who, like I told Jake a few minutes ago, I haven't seen him in a long time, but I surely see him a lot on TV. So Jake is the founder of Punchbowl News, and has been covering national politics for more than a decade. He's a contributor to NBC News and appears almost daily, like I just mentioned, across all of the network's platforms. Jake is a graduate of George Washington University and Columbia Journalism School. He lives in Washington with his wife and 2 kids, and is an avid runner and listener to the Grateful Dead and Fish. So let's hear a round of applause for Jake and Sarah. Excellent. All right. So Jake and Sarah, anything to add in real fast before we get started?
I think you covered the landscape.
Yeah, and we were very nice to you, but also you had the protexia of brothers, older brothers.
Very, very, very true. Always had my back, those two. Jake, just to get started, why don't you tell us what Punch Bowl means?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Greg. And as always, it's good to be with you, Rabbi, and Rachel and Sarah. Punch Bowl News is Punch Bowl is the nickname for the Capitol, the Secret Service nickname for the Capitol. So in our estimation, and Sarah probably disagrees with me on this, but she disagrees with me on a lot of things. But our view, me and my colleagues, I started this company 2 months ago with 3 colleagues from Politico, where I was for 11 years. We believe power emanates from the Capitol, and we believe that the Capitol is the center of the political universe. And we, that's kind of our theory of the case, and we cover the politics of legislating. So a lot of people like Sarah has covered a lot of campaigns. There's a kind of 2 strains in political journalism, I'd say. Sarah, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but it's really people who cover, this is an oversimplification, but people who cover Congress and governing, and people who cover campaigns. Some people do both. I've done both, although far more governing than campaigns. So again, I was a Politico for 11 years. And during the pandemic, I decided I was going to make a change. And here I am. And I have a sweater. So it's actually, it's official now that it's stitched into this jacket. But no, so what we do is we have 3 newsletters a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And our maniacal focus is on the leadership of Congress and the leadership of Washington, and how to simplify it, I think, a little bit, to how just the politics of governing, how things get done or don't get done in Washington.
Excellent, thank you. And Sarah, just how did you arrive at CNN? Kind of little background on the journey to get there.
I actually interned at CNN when I was in college. I was lucky enough to intern there, and I always wanted to work in news, but I actually double majored in college in English and history. And so it was, which was great for me, because I basically really learned how to read well and write fast, and read fast and write well. And those are 2 things that have just become more and more and more important in covering news and in working in journalism. So I actually worked at CNN for a little while when I got straight out of school. And then I worked at CBS for several years. Many of you know in 2012, I was embedded with Governor Romney when he, he was governor, or we referred to him at the time as governor, but he is now Senator Romney. When he was running for president, I was with him for like a year and a half. And then I moved over to NBC for a little bit, and then I've been at CNN for a little while. And so what I cover at CNN is basically I work in the New York bureau. I'm in the field, as Jake said. And the only thing I would sort of, I do agree with Jake. Obviously, there's 2 different strands. There's when you're out in the field covering these things sort of as they get to Washington, and then there's covering them really on the ground in Washington, like Jake does. But I also cover a lot more. I cover campaigns, but also just the politicking when these senators and congressmen and people are back home. And I also cover a lot of just real general things, like when a hurricane or a tornado or a pandemic comes through town, and then you're on the ground there and you really see how, it's 2-pronged. You're covering what the actual news is that's going on there, and having also the political background that I have. You're covering sort of them doing what they do need or don't need to be doing when you're there. So yeah, so it's sort of two sides to the same coin.
Excellent, perfect. So let's put those rapid reaction skills to the test here. So we'll put about 60 seconds on the clock, and I'm going to give you a rapid fire of a bunch of questions. Jake, get ready. You'll get those same questions coming up next. So Sarah, we got 60 seconds on the clock. First question, your most memorable experience covering politics.
I produced an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the Supreme Court a few years ago. And it was definitely the most memorable interview that I have produced. It was in the Supreme Court. It was in her chambers, which is just so rare. There were so few of us allowed in. She actually made some news in the interview, which was kind of interesting. And she was just she was just a fascinating person to listen to. It was like just sort of I mean, I think we all as journalists, we're constantly asking questions. You want answers because you kind of still want an education. And she was sort of a fascinating person to interview and learn from, and be in that setting was really interesting for me. And she had also gone to my college. So we talked about being nice Jewish girls from Cornell a little bit. It was very cute.
Excellent. Jake, over to you. Same question. Most memorable experience covering politics.
Probably January 6th is up there.
All right, let's not get into that one in too much detail.
I don't know. I would say, I don't know if there's an individual memory, but I would say that it's a unique experience that Sarah has had and I have as well, that you get to know politicians as individuals, as humans, which is definitely different than just seeing them on TV, and Sarah's known Mitt Romney well, and I've known the last 3 or 4 speakers of the House pretty well. So that it's less about a single experience and more probably about a collection of experiences.
Excellent. And Jake, we'll stick with you. Your most uncomfortable experience thus far.
January 6th. No, that could take the cake out of every category. I kind of think as a reporter, I don't really have many uncomfortable experiences. They're all uncomfortable to some degree. I mean, listen, I've written a lot of stories over the years about members of Congress in various scandals, whether they're financial, sexual, or whatever. So, asking those questions is sometimes, I don't know if it's uncomfortable, but it's sometimes strange. Is that a good answer? Sarah, how did I do on that one?
Yeah, I have a similar, I also had a hard time thinking of uncomfortable. I think because if you do what we do and it's like so fast and so rapid fire and you're thrown into situations really, really fast sometimes, and you just have to like get up to speed. Of course it can be uncomfortable. I also was kind of going to say January 6th, but I have a different, I came at it from a different vantage point than Jake did. So yeah, so that would be my answer, but for probably some different reasons.
All right, excellent. And besides January 6th, because we're going to cover that a little bit later, so let's not use that as a scapegoat here. So time your Jewishness came into play, Sarah.
Well, it is obviously, it's always a part of me. I think that to go back to what I was saying about covering Mitt Romney, I actually felt very much like when I was covering his presidential race, it was really interesting. He's obviously Mormon. There were things that I felt like, and at the time, it wasn't sort of like it is now where he's a senator from Utah, who at the time was a governor from Massachusetts, and they really did not, I don't want to say they wanted to underplay, but they really did not want a conversation around Mormonism. And but he was so pious. And I remember there was a time when, his tax returns were being released because presidential candidates did that then. And and one of them did it last cycle, but it was almost like the Romney campaign, only their reticence to release them was actually only because he'd given so much money to church. And I felt like, it was really interesting because like I come from a background in Judaism where people give a lot of charity too, and that's not normal and that's not weird, and it shouldn't be looked at as strange. And I thought that a lot of the way that I sort of saw things that they saw as challenges, I could kind of understand, but also didn't, I felt like I kind of came at it from a little bit more of like a personal vantage point. And they were also like really helpful. They knew that there were things I didn't eat. There was a lot of stuff that he doesn't eat. Like there were certain things that were quite interesting, that there were kind of some dichotomies there when I was covering them. I would say also, just more recently, like, and I'm sure Jake would say the same, there's been, all the Jared and Ivanka stuff, and, even during the campaign, when they were running, and Rabbi Lookstein, who is obviously the Rabbi Ramaz, where you went to high school, where I went to high school, he was kind of, involved with some stuff with that. Like there's always things, there's always things that come up. But yeah, so it comes up sometimes just on a daily basis, and it sometimes just comes up on like a more broad thing on a story that you're covering, where you can just like really see things differently than other people do.
Right. And Jake, over to you.
Sorry, I was on mute. So a few things. I think there's good and bad here, and we shouldn't paper over the bad. I get a ton of anti-Semitic emails all the time, and tweets and various other forms of communication. People have found out how to reach me in every and all ways. People notice that I do television with a set of Talmuds in the backs, so I get some prideful emails of people who say. Actually, I got an email from a guy last week, a rabbi last week, who actually came to me through somebody else, who said, I see you have a lot of Talmuds in the background of your TV thing, and I know you're a Grateful Dead fan. Would you do a conversation about the Grateful Dead and Judaism? To which I said yes, but I was thinking about it today, and I figured I really don't actually have any connection between the Judaism and Grateful Dead, so I might sit the conversation out on second thought. But listen, I mean, I'm pretty public in my religious beliefs, and I've traveled to Israel twice for work. Once with John Boehner when he was the Speaker of the House in I can't remember what year it was, probably 2014. And then once with Mike Pompeo when he was Secretary of State in 2019. So there's been a variety of instances that it rears its head into my life. It's a part of who I am. So, it's part of everything I do.
Excellent. So moving off of Boehner and Mike Pompeo, most charismatic politician you both have either met?
Jake,
so am I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go to Jake.
I charismatic, I guess, is tough, Sarah. I don't know where you'd go on this. But I don't know. Bernie Sanders is charismatic in his own way with crowd. He's not a personally terribly charismatic guy. I would say, Sarah, you'll probably identify with this in some way, shape, or form. I'd say Rick Perry might be probably the best individual campaigner, meaning retail politician I've ever covered. What do you think of that, Sarah?
He was until
he didn't do him much, didn't do him any good, but but I think that's a fair assessment.
I mean, to me, the gimme is Bill Clinton, who, like his politics or not, completely takes up a room when you are in the same room as him. And I've been in the same room as him several times. But when I was sort of first out of college, and I think he had a book that came out called My Life. And CNN, I was either an intern or a news assistant or something, and CNN sent me to like a Barnes and Noble in the city to cover it. And it was crazy. It was like, he could be in a crowded Barnes and Noble, and you just felt like Zoom, like he was the only person that saw you. So I actually ended up getting a copy of his book. I didn't like go on the rope line, I was covering it, but for some reason, I got a book handed to me, and I brought it home to my parents and my mom's, and I was really proud of it. I was like, oh, this is like this was a really interesting experience. And, you know, and here I have this book now. And then my mom was like, you stay away from him. Don't ever do that.
She's
And
right.
then my dad tried to sell the book on eBay because it was autographed. So, you know, a lot of good that did me. But anyway,
And I will say one other thing. On that same note, like I've met the last several presidents, I guess, but Trump was very personally charismatic. I mean, you could tell that he was a very good real estate salesman and marketer, right? He's just a very personally charismatic guy who you know, is very inquisitive in the times that I've been in his company about you and what you're up to and all this stuff. So that I'd say, you know, there's different strains there, I'd say.
Excellent, perfect. And just to wrap up the rapid fire, so your favorite bicultural day school teacher, along with the role Stamford has played in your upbringing and in really your successes.
Sarah, you take that first.
oh my God, favorite teacher, you're gonna get me in trouble. That was not on the pre-interview list. Okay.
You have to go. There's an easy
I
Maura
need to like
Edna
starting
answer.
kindergarten.
There's an easy Maura Edna answer that I'm gonna fall back
Well,
on.
you're still
without even
scared.
thinking
You're still
twice.
scared.
That is true. It rears its head in my dreams.
Yes, definitely. I mean, obviously, like Mr. S was and I'm not lying when I say that. Actually, some stuff in it, I was thinking about it, talking like when we were planning this, and just some of the skill sets that you learn about, like talking to really powerful people, and specifically really powerful men, and just speaking to them and being respected by them. I honestly think that even as a young person, my interactions with Mr. S might like it was like you couldn't say no to him, but also you could have a conversation with him. And I do think that was, you know, I don't know. I think it was quite helpful for me to have someone like that. And to the broader question of Stamford and general things like that, you know, the last time that Jake and I saw each other in person was like exactly a year ago in Minnesota, covering I was at the time covering the presidential frontrunner who would have been perhaps the first Jewish president, Bernie Sanders. But I was covering Bernie, and we were in Minnesota at a rally at an Ilhan Omar was opening for him at this speech he was giving in Minnesota, and Jake and I were together. And I literally remember, Jake, that we were both standing on the press riser like, ooh, our parents would love this. Like, you know, but I mean, it's fascinating that like we've both been there aren't that many people on a press riser. So the fact that Jake and I are both there and both come from the same place and the same background is pretty unique. And I'll also say the one other sort of Stamford plug that I feel like I have to give is that I did have another funny interaction around this time last year, maybe a little bit beforehand, with Richard Blumenthal. Must have been at either a shul or a bicultural dinner or something, because I got some call from my dad like on a Sunday night at 7 or 8 p.m. being like, and it was like kind of urgent. It was like, is Richard Blumenthal involved in impeaching the president? And I was like, well, yeah, kind of, yeah. This was the last impeachment. And he was like, okay, bye. And then I didn't hear anything else. And then I got another call back like 5 minutes later, and he's like, but I need to know like which committees does he sit on? Like how directly involved is he in the impeachment? I just want to. And then I later found out that that Blumenthal was at this dinner that my dad was at, and he was, I think, badgering him a little bit about impeachment proceedings. And I saw Blumenthal like a week later he was at CNN, and I sort of went down to sort of say hello. And sort of apologize for any bad behavior or whatever. And Blumenthal was like, oh, it was so much fun. And I love going to those dinners, and your dad was having the best time. And I love talking to everyone. So anyway, so it's fun to, it's fun to sort of have those connections as well. Even though
Yeah, I would say, and as Stamford as kind of a broader, yeah, I mean, I see Sarah all the time in bizarre places, New Hampshire. I don't know, lots of bizarre places. I would say, yeah, I mean, my first experience in politics was, and I think I even wrote my college essay about this, and I'm sure my mother's saying somewhere, yes, you did write your college essay about this, about Joe Lieberman's run for the presidency in 2000, when I was God, I must have been a freshman in yeah, was that right? Yeah, when he announced his run for the presidency at Stanford High School. I remember that well, and I was covering it, I think, for the West Hill, where I went to high school, the West Hill newspaper. And also, I just think, like, broadly speaking, Stanford's a terrific Jewish community, a really special Jewish community that, and it's where we both grew up, both Sarah and I. So we both kind of, it kind of sets the stage for a lot of how you live your life and all that stuff. So.
You would think we do enough Zoom meetings all day long that we would remember to unmute ourselves when we talk, but we still talk while muted. So with that being said, why don't we transition to some current events? Just before we do, let me just remind everybody, you can send me a message on the Zoom chat if you have any specific questions, whether it's related to a topic we're discussing or for the Q&A at the very end. So something that Sarah said before about vantage points when it came to January 6th kind of triggered a memory. There's a movie called Vantage Point where a politician is assassinated in a foreign country, and the movie basically divides up into like 10-minute sprints between different people and their vantage point of seeing the shooter. So with that being said, I think with Jake being kind of on the ground and Sarah a little bit more behind the scenes, it would be really interesting to start off tonight's conversation with what took place on January 6th. And, Jake, kind of from a personal perspective, sitting there watching TV, having my phone out where I was watching your constant tweets and videos coming out, and then also turning to, CNBC and, seeing you on TV. It was obviously we were all nervous and scared and worried and wanted to make sure that you were okay. But then on the other hand, there's Sarah, you at the news desk, and kind of the behind the scenes perspective. So Jake, why don't we start with you and really start digging in there?
Yeah, sure. So I work in the Capitol every day and have been in the Capitol every day since 2009. Not every day, but most days since 2009. So the Capitol is like a second home to me, and it has been for a long, it's my place of work, and probably have spent more time there than I have my various places I've lived in the corresponding period. But it was scary. I mean, there's no way around that, right? You kind of wonder whether the mob is going to get to you. And we've had, going back to 2010, 2011, 2010, there was various, rallies and protests at the Capitol, but the Capitol Police is pretty strong, is pretty effective. But they were obviously not able to stop this. But you don't ever assume that they're going to get in the building. And the main door that they came in on the east front of the Capitol, so the side where the Supreme Court is, they broke through the door, and I was standing there literally. It's outside of my office, between my office and the restroom, which is really like a couple hundred, not even a couple hundred feet for me. So that was scary. And listen, we're in a room. They had written, kill the media on the door, so we could tell they weren't exactly fans of the press. Listen, we had no way out. We were sitting ducks. We just, by the grace of God, nothing happened to us. Frankly, I think that's fair to say, and that's not a that's not a overstatement in any way, shape, or form. We have a big sign on our door that says press on the door of the press room for obvious reasons. And we were just hoping that they didn't get in, and we heard the gunshots, and we heard the, we're very close to the house floor and people banging down our door. So it was scary, but we were eventually evacuated about, we were about 5 or 6 p.m. So we were some of the last people evacuated from my office, which is on the 3rd floor of the Capitol. So really right in the mix of everything. And I've been there every day since, not every day, obviously, but 95% of the time. And it's now a fortress. So, listen, it was a challenging day, I'd say. But we survived. So that was good.
So what was the scariest moment for you that may or may not have been reported?
I don't know about that. That's a good question, Greg. I don't really have a scariest moment. I think one of the scariest moments, we were in the hallways, and I don't know that there was a particularly scariest moment. We had heard that they were going to move, and I think they've said this publicly, they were going to reconvene Congress in another place on a military base close to the Capitol, which they didn't do. They came back that night. I mean, also remember, you probably, not that you would remember this, but this was like day 3 of our company. so we're trying to like make sure our
so
company,
good for business. Let's put
it was not bad for business. I mean, I was hoping that it didn't come to an insurrection to get us business. Yeah, so it was very stressful in every respect. And also remember, we're like in the middle of a deadly pandemic. So bringing thousands of people into the Capitol without masks was not a particularly comforting experience, even if we weren't in immediately going to die. We didn't want to then contract COVID. That was something we were looking to avoid as well.
I mean, one of the videos that you had posted, I think, was you were on a balcony and you were watching over the people trying to break down the wall or break down the door. And I think at one point they had broken a window and they were trying to unlock the door. I mean, what was going through your mind at that moment?
I should probably get out of the hallways. But I mean, we were locked down, the people who say this wasn't an armed insurrection are just like deluding themselves. I don't want to get too much into the substance here, but like these people, there were guns recovered, there were pipe bombs around the Capitol, there were people who had flags with spears at the top, and they were beating people, beating down doors. I mean, this was scary. These people weren't coming for, for casual, we disagree with you conversation, right? So my thought at that moment was that I should probably not be where I was, although there wasn't anywhere to go. I mean, our office is in the middle of everything, as I said, right? It's in the middle of it's right off the House floor. So, I mean, listen, I had a lot of colleagues people in the press corps who were in the chamber. I wasn't in the chamber. I had left moments before that kind of moments before the chamber was locked down and stuff. But I mean, it was serious enough that they took the congressional leadership to another location, which is pretty serious.
Excellent. So kind of rewinding all the way back to the beginning, Sarah, why don't you take us to where you were? What were you doing? What was going on at the news desk?
I was watching it the same way that everyone else was as it started happening. And then I got a call from my desk. I was here in my apartment telling me to go down there because, so again, this is the difference.
And the scariest thing for Sarah, I'm looking at an email from my colleague Rachel, so I keep saying Rachel accidentally. The scariest thing for Sarah is that she had to come to Washington, which she hates more. She hates more than anything.
I hate being in Washington, but it was ironic because so I was there because I do, with all due respect to Jake, I do cover a lot of riots, protests, armed things. I've been in a lot of them, and I hate to say it, but like, to be honest, like, I have riot gear and all of this stuff sitting like for me, that's tailored for me, that's in my apartment. I've only used it when I've covered stories in the US. I think that journalists 10, 20 years ago would never say that if they had a bulletproof hat and gas masks, and the way that some of us at various news organizations are, and very specific people sort of are trained to do these things. I mean, the first time I wore a gas mask was in Ferguson, Missouri. And so, and this past year, between the pandemic and riots and protests, like, I've been sort of in a lot of crazy stuff. And there's even an elevated level to covering these. There's one level to just like keeping your team and your crew and your news gathering capabilities safe, but in a general situation where you're maybe getting shot at or pepper sprayed or whatever. But there's a whole heightened level to it when you're in a pandemic and you're wearing masks. So as a producer, you're in charge of like a ton of people, and you're really like barking out orders and grabbing people and eyes on, and in a very, very sort of high combat seeming situation, but like your faculties are a bit limited. So and we all just kind of have to do the best that we can with that. So when January 6th happened, honestly, I mean, it was CNN has a DC bureau. It's very big. Everyone knew that stuff was going to happen there. I think we maybe probably had a few extra people on the ground to cover that event. But when it started becoming what it was, and literally, like I said, I was watching it in New York, and I got a call, and they were like, and our desk was like, we need you to go down to DC. And I was like, by the time I get there, I mean, won't this be over? And they were like, we don't know, like, this could go on. We just genuinely don't know kind of if this is sort of a combat, like if this is sort of a more long-term thing. I mean, the fencing that everyone sees at the Capitol and everything right now was certainly not there then. And it actually wasn't there until like a week later. So it was just very, very unclear what was happening, what was going on. And I guess sort of my role in it was to go down and almost be like a war zone producer, to go down to DC and sort of get there. And then of course, when I got there that night, by the time I got there, it was over. And but there were still people in town, and there were still a lot of concerns, and there were just only my discomfort with it wasn't like, so I've been at these Trump rallies. I've been in plenty of situations where and have had guns around me, and guns sort of in our, I mean, I work for CNN. When you're at some of these rallies, and when you're in some of these situations, you are a target for sure. But you just kind of have to know how to deal with them and all of that. And then it actually just became such a interesting situation, because I had to stay down there. Like of course, as Jake knows and everyone knows, that thankfully it did die down after January 6th, but then it was sort of uncertain when things would come back, and then he was being impeached again, and then of course there was inauguration, and we were in a pandemic. So I actually had to stay in DC for like 20 days or something in January, just because of, not just because of the threats or concerns that there might be danger there, but because of quarantine rules between DC and New York. And if you're in DC, like, so all of that has all like complicated all of our, guess this is, being sort of a frontline journalist or whatever is considered essential work, but the pandemic has done nothing but complicate everyone's lives. But it has definitely also sort of even changed kind of how we can even get to stories and get from stories and move about. So it was definitely a very weird time in DC, and I ended up being there. I went down on January 6th, and I was there through January 23rd or something.
Wow. Well, that was really interesting perspective from both of you. Sarah, transitioning to COVID, like you had just mentioned, working through a pandemic. So in one of our pre-meetings, you shared a very interesting story about your early days on the COVID front lines and helping CNN get out the right information when it came to the outbreak in New York. So why don't we go there?
Yeah, so I had a really, I was covering Sanders still. You know, this is obviously basically, I think a lot of people have been thinking about where they were like exactly a year from like where we are today. And I was in Burlington covering Bernie, and through personal channels, at like 6 or 7 in the morning, I got an email forwarded to me that SAR was closed that day because of someone in the community who had a suspected case of COVID. And so these things are always obviously tricky when it's something in your personal life that's your work life, you know, you don't want to, but like I knew that this was the fact that there was something going on in the New York area was 100% the first case that we were experiencing here on the East Coast. And I was in Burlington, and I just called my news desk and sort of said, you know, we've got to put a call into this school. There's something going on. I didn't put any details about like I just sort of cushioned everything. I cushioned my sources and cushioned everything. But I mean, it ended up being, I mean, that really was the beginning of when the whole sort of New York area went into lock. And I think the email or the notification from SAR had gone out at like, you know, 6 or 7 in the morning or something. And I had seen it shortly after. And we have morning calls at CNN that are like the entire network is on these calls. And the lead of the call that morning was like blaring, flashing lights. Like we think that there is a case in this New York, out like the outskirts of New York City, like it was like boom, 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 like breaking, you know, but we were still working to confirm it and all of that. And so on this call, on this like international call, it really is like the entire company is on this call. Someone said something like, oh, you know, and it has first emanated because we've reached out to this school, and we found out that this school in Riverdale called SAR is, you know, like they're closed for a day or something. And I had to get on the call and say, no, it's not SAR. Like that would be a very unfortunate mingling. It was SAR. And it was just one of those things where you just had to sort of jump in and correct things. And you don't, you know, like, and it just snowballed from there. I'm not saying I like broke the COVID story in the New York area, but it actually was really interesting because that kind of is sort of how that was at least how the snowball effect happened in New York. And then, you know, of course, just on a personal level, I do want to say that like this person's name was not revealed publicly for a very long time. I knew it through personal channels. There were emails going out from a lot of Jewish communities saying, you know, daven for this person. It's not like his name wasn't known to just people who check their email. And I would never have sent a note to my desk saying like, this is his Hebrew, you know, like I do want to be clear that there is very much a separation between like church and state on things that are important like that, and protecting people's identities and ways that we should go about finding out sort of information the appropriate way. But yeah, I did have this interesting experience where the SAR email happened to come to me and kicked off a lot of cover. And I was in Burlington. I was just sort of like, you guys might want to check this out. I don't know.
But like Queen Esther, you saved the Jews from the SARS outbreak at SARS.
I did.
Yeah.
I saved everyone from the deadly disease.
Excellent. And Jake, just same kind of topic here, but a little bit of the opposite side. So covering, you know, the Hill, politicians, etc. during the time of COVID, what's changed? you know, I think I
Yeah.
saw you. I think I saw you interviewing Nancy Pelosi. You had to be 6 feet away. You know, I might have personally been 12 feet away, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, so listen, I mean, the Capitol was like a COVID hot zone, right? We've had, I think a dozen or more, definitely more than a dozen members of Congress contract COVID, and you know, and we've now covered as a collective, you know, press corps, about almost $6 trillion of federal spending, trying to deal with COVID. So that's been, you know, and I remember when I was still a Politico when this started, before Punchbowl News existed, we said something along the lines of, we wrote something that this will be way costlier than the financial crisis, and it obviously has been since the financial crisis. I think that bill was 800 billion, and the stimulus afterwards was 787 billion. We've now spent about $4 or $5 trillion on this. So just the role of government in the post-COVID world has been just absolutely astounding. Now, I mean, I'm just lucky, thank God, knock on wood, I've not gotten COVID, and that's just a miracle, because I've been working in person every single day, as is Sarah, for you know,
I feel very lucky
like,
about that.
yeah,
I'm
knock
sure
on
you
wood,
get
right?
I'm sure you get I get tested also like once a week.
Yeah, I get tested about three times a week, in the Capitol. So yeah, I mean, it's been a challenge, and we've been lucky. We've been lucky to not get it, and yeah. So that's my thoughts on that.
I'm on mute again. Have you transitioned some of your interviews to Zoom interviews, or have you stayed away from that?
I don't use Zoom. I honestly, it's very nice to see you all on Zoom. I use it. I feel very lucky. My job is very much still, I haven't been in my newsroom since before the Nevada caucuses last year, because I was already on the road for the primaries. And then obviously, and like I said, I was in Burlington, everything. And then everything got shut down. So by the time that they actually sort of were clamping down on our newsroom last March, I was kind of like, well, I don't care, because I haven't been there in a month. So I feel like I'm like the last person who should go. Like, if you guys have something, I don't want to go in. But like you know, my job is still to go out and do things in person. I've been doing a lot of COVID stuff. I was basically our Javits Center like bureau chief for like a month did my taxes last year on the side of the West Side Highway when that like USS Comfort was coming in. So a lot of stuff that I've done has been sort of still kind of in person, but you know, we just like, but from a safe distance with masks, you know, with all the precautions, we just, you know, we're all just kind of like doing the best we can. Thankfully, like my life kind of isn't really on Zoom that much. I'm going tomorrow to Utah. If we could please mute my parents from hearing this, because I have to cover some white supremacists tomorrow. But
do you have a problem getting them to meet you on Zoom?
Yeah, they're not as amenable to doing that.
Yeah,
They're a little bit of a rural place, so I don't know how the internet connection is going to be out there. But anyway, I mean, you know, like don't get me wrong, I have not been like on planes, trains, and automobiles this entire time. And also, to be quite honest, even during the campaign, I was mostly covering Biden, and I was basically just luck of the draw. I was mostly covering Pennsylvania, which turned out to be a pretty important state to cover. So it was drivable, it was manageable. Delaware is manageable and drivable. A lot of even the campaign stuff was just so pared down and different. And yeah, so it was able, you know, we were able to keep safe. And obviously we've had cases at CNN of COVID, but like everyone is so, I mean, I'm knock on wood, so grateful and so careful that we've been able to be as safe as we have been so far.
Excellent. Perfect. So why don't we now go on to some of the questions that I've received here on the chat. There have been a lot of them coming in, so I'll get to as many of them as possible. The first one, I guess for both of you is, what's the biggest story right now that the media is not covering?
That's a good question. I don't know if Sarah, do you have any thoughts?
Well, this is hard because Jake and I both like to think that we're covering the most important thing at all times.
Right.
Like you're
Right.
like the two wrong people.
Or I could rephrase the story that you're not allowed to cover.
I'm
allowed
allowed to cover whatever I want. I'm my own boss, so I could do whatever I want. But I don't know. I mean, if I thought it deserved coverage, I would cover it. So I don't know that that's really applicable to me. I mean, what doesn't? I don't know. What do you think, Sarah?
There is nothing that I'm not allowed to cover.
Nothing. Certainly nothing that that I can't cover. Listen, there's a lot. I would say this. I would say that there are. I think that there are certain policy issues that deserve more coverage. I think that the intervention of our government into every facet of our life in the post-COVID world is fascinating. But I don't have any. I don't have any. I don't have any groundbreaking thoughts on that.
All right. Second question, is the bipartisanship as bad behind the scenes as it is in front of the camera?
I think it's actually better, to be honest with you.
What, better
Meaning-
better in front of the camera?
No, I would say that it's better. I'd say that like people don't hate each other, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of people have good a lot of members of Congress have good relationships across the aisle and can't work with these people and can't work together in a legislative sense. There's a lot of people, a lot of strange bedfellows in the sense that people are friends with people you wouldn't necessarily think they'd be friends with. But listen, our politics right now are what they are, and there's nothing that that we could do to stop to fix that in the immediate, as frustrating as it might be.
We have CNN breaking news from Jody Boxer. Will Sarah call her mother to let her know everything is okay as she covers white supremacists?
Please, I told you to mute her for that. Thank you, Jody.
All right.
But if anyone needs a house in Stamford, Jody Boxer's available.
All right, let's get back to the real news. So do we think that the Republicans will retake control of Congress in the midterms?
Yes, I do. Yes, absolutely. I think that the president's party usually loses an average of 27 seats in the midterm elections in the House of Representatives, and so if we're just judging as with past as precedent, yes. There's always a chance that it doesn't happen. 2002 was the last time it didn't happen, and obviously we could remember 2018. Democrats took the House back when in the first midterm of Trump's tenure, and in 2010 in Obama's, but in 2002 we were right off of September 11th. George Bush was still relatively popular. People wanted the status quo. Will they want that now? I doubt it. I think that Republicans will. Sarah, what do you think?
I mean, I think that I don't know actually, because I think that the Trump of it all is will make a huge difference, because it depends who the Republicans are sort of running with, and in certain districts that were close, and where they're really looking to sort of win their seats back or whatever. Like it depends on the Trump of it all. Trump is saying now he wants to go in and primary Lisa Murkowski, who is a Republican in Alaska. So if he wants to go and sort of embolden some Trump-like Republicans in some of these districts that could maybe beat off a Democrat, but could maybe be beating other Republicans. I don't know. There's sort of like a there's an X factor there that it doesn't necessarily follow the same sort of guidelines of what we've seen in the past, to me.
Excellent. Next question here for both of you. Your viewpoint on the use of anonymous sources and citing anonymous sources in articles.
A necessary evil, probably. I think Sarah would agree. I do it very sparingly, almost never, I would say, unless it's an extenuating circumstance. I think the idea that every administration, every politician does it, meaning every administration demands it of reporters. The Trump administration did it just as much as the Obama administration and the Bush administration. So, it's not great, but it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I think that this sort of speaks to maybe something that I would like to say also about just people's trust in news in general, which is that,
You're a brave soul, Sarah. You're a brave soul.
at least for in my experience, certainly at CNN, if I send something in and say this is from an anonymous source, it does not just get from my email onto CNN or something like that. It goes through I get phone calls. There are layers and layers involved in not necessarily knowing who that source is, but just confirming the information, double backing on confirming the information. We have lawyers involved. There are obviously editors and standards, and there are many, many layers to confirming sort of what actually goes on the air. And it can be something from as small as a quote from an anonymous source to this is actually sort of something that I deal with every single day in terms of getting pieces on the air, whatever. Nothing goes on the air that is written in a package or in a wire copy or something that hasn't gone through a pretty rigorous vetting process. So, if we all, of course, have sources, and at the end of the day, if you trust your source and trust it enough to go through those processes, but it shouldn't be that people think that, Kellyanne texts someone and then boom, it's on TV. That's just totally not how it works. And not how anonymous sources work. And, but as Jake said, it is we all try to do it as little as possible, or try to cushion things as much as possible so that it's not, so that if someone doesn't want to be on the record as themselves, that we can sort of make it clear at least what vantage point they're coming from. I mean, if someone says to you, I was in Albany this entire past week, if someone said to me, I have a quote, about something against Governor Cuomo, here it is. I'm not just there needs to be some, you can't just be oh, some random person just said this about, about Cuomo. You need to say what the context is to who that person is, even if they don't want their name on the record. It's important. And then maybe it won't get through the vetting process. That's why we have a vetting process. It's important.
Right, exactly. And it is about 8:30 right now, so we're going to go about another 10 minutes. Jake, is that okay? Jake pre-warned me his bedtime was 8:30, so yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
We're pushing the envelope, but it's okay.
All right, so we do have a ton of questions coming in. Again, if I don't get to all of them, I do apologize. So why don't we go to, let's go to Middle East politics. So which of Trump's pro-Israel policies do you think Biden will unwind?
I don't think any of them. I don't think Biden has much, and I think he said this, and I think this has been written. I think that he doesn't his focus is going to be it's going to be on other parts of the world. I think he said as much publicly. I think that I think that's the extent of my thought on that. Anything from you, Sarah?
No, I mean, because I don't really think that Trump's Israel policy, I don't I think that that's a bit, I think that's a bit like judgy. I don't, or like, I don't know how much there is to unwind.
I think that's right. I think much of I think another way to say it, and I think this is what you're getting at, is much of his success is already, and he's not going to go back and ask Israel to say to take back its relations with Morocco or to
Undo the embassy, like who
yeah,
cares?
undo the embassy. I don't think anything like that. And by the way, I don't have to think. Biden has said he's not moving, he's not closing the embassy in Jerusalem. So he's not. That's not. I don't think that's. Will he continue to pressure Saudi Arabia to cut some sort of normalization deal with Israel? I don't know the answer to that specifically. The Trump administration represented toward the end of the term that they were on the brink of a couple more normalization agreements, and I'm not sure that those will come to fruition. Now, I don't have any sense, but I don't think anything specifically will be unwind. Whether the focus will still be there, I think, is a fair question.
And when it comes to Iran, what do you think is going to happen?
Oh God, I have no idea. Sarah, you want to take a stab at that? Sarah, you're going to leave this one to me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in Iran. I don't have any idea. I really don't have any idea. I would be just completely guessing, and that's not a good. I don't have a crystal ball, so I'll let you use your own imaginations for that.
Hopefully the imagination doesn't run too far. All right, let's go to, how do you as journalists maintain objectivity in reporting news if the narrative is in conflict to your own personal political views?
You want to take this, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, it's not that hard. I mean, the job is the job, and it is not, if you're good at this, it is not hard to cover what you need to cover. And I mean, I think that very few people in my life really think what I know, how I feel about any kind of specific issue or something. I mean, I really do not discuss it. It is not, I mean, it is, you just stay the line. Like, this is, I know that people think that things have become so crazy and so left and so right, which I think is basically because Fox has sort of broken off from the rest of the media landscape that I'm sort of a part of, I guess, of the major news networks and stuff. But I just keep doing the job that I was supposed to do and always thought I was supposed to do, and did ever since I got out of college. And you go into these things as objectively as possible, but with as much background and knowledge and information. You don't just put things on air that are just like, oh, well, these white supremacists that I'm speaking to in Utah tomorrow, they say this, that must be true. Like, but you don't need to sort of, it is not hard to do, from my perspective, it is not hard to do this job and keep a level head and cover what you need to cover and sort of keep an ear on the ground to things that might be important, and to sort of and be able to cover them in a rational way with the context that is important to tell people sort of what they need to know.
Yeah, I'll put it even. I agree with everything Sarah said. I would put it even more. More simply. I think this is, if you're a doctor and you don't and someone comes into your office and needs treatment, you're not going to decide whether you like them or not. You're going to do your job. I'm in a business where I need both parties to tell me things that they're not supposed to tell me, and if I favor one over the other, that's not going to be a useful business model for me, because I'm in the information trafficking business, and if I can't traffic in information from both parties, I'm pretty useless. So, and I know it sounds naive. I just have not been. I've been in this business now since I got out of college, like Sarah has, and I don't have any I don't care about, I have no personal stake in any of these things. Maybe that makes me a bad person. But
Well, and I'll also say again, to the nature of the job itself. I mean, I have a relative who's a police officer who went during some of the protests over the summer that I was covering, which then, you know, would become kind of dangerous at night. And this person who's a police officer said to me, like, oh, you know, blah blah blah, like I heard all my fellow cops are gonna, you know, they're pissed about the Blue Lives Matter, the sort of sort of representation of how police officers handle things. And I heard that they're not going to cover, you know, they're just going to like go on strike at a certain other, you know, big event that was going on. And I just thought, like, okay, I mean, I have to go to like rallies all the time where people are like, CNN sucks, and it doesn't mean we don't cover it. Like, it's you literally have to tune out like stadiums full of people saying, like, screaming at you and kind of targeting you, and just do your job. And so for someone to say like, oh, we're just gonna sort of, well, they don't want us there, we're not gonna be there, it's like, that's just not how it works. I mean, the job is the job, like you do your job. And so our job is to be sort of present things as what they are and as objectively, but also with the appropriate context, not to just to like spit them out. And I think that that's, you know, really important. And you do have to have a certain disposition to just be able to just sort of focus and do that.
Excellent. Last question. I'm going to say the question and then give you 2 seconds to think about it. And then I both want you to shout out the answer at the same time. So who is the most powerful person in DC today? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Nancy Pelosi.
Sarah, say that again.
The president.
The president. Oh. Well, I think that sums it up perfectly, considering Jake focuses on the Capitol and Sarah focuses on the rest of politics.
More broadly.
So, you know, just really appreciate, Sarah, Jake, your time. I've been watching the participant count for the Zoom call the whole time. Not one person left this Zoom. So I just, it's a testament to the two of you and to the rabbi and Simeon. Thank you for asking me to host. For everybody that came, this was a great evening, and hopefully we could do it again soon.
Thank you. And thanks
everybody. Thanks, Rabbi.
Much nachas to the families, and Hashem should bless all of us. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night.